Welcome or welcome back to Fushi's Room. For those of you that are new here, feel free to subscribe. If you love anime reviews, you love anime analysis, this is a great place to sit back and have a little fun. Now, it's time for me to talk to you about one of the greatest anime films ever made. This is life intertwined with film in the most beautiful way possible. Millennium Actress. Holla at your boy, we doing anime review. Yeah, holla at your boy, we doing anime review. Yeah, holla at your boy, we doing anime review. Yeah, holla at your boy, we doing anime reviews. Millennium Actress is a 2002 anime film made by the late great Satoshi Kon, one of the greatest directors that ever lived. It's yet another masterpiece in his distinguished filmography and will be loved by fans of Western titles like Everything Everywhere All at Once. Now, to be perfectly honest with you, I went back and forth for a while on how exactly I should start this video because this is such an interesting and complex title, but I think I'll start this off with a history lesson to sort of slide into the Millennium Actress themes because, as we know, everything happens for a reason. Until the 1850s, Japan was a very isolationist nation with very little contact with the outside world, save for the occasional trade here and there. The nation had a foreign policy called Sakoku, which essentially meant minimizing trade, no one leaving Japan, and no one entering Japan. It's believed that this was done primarily to limit the spread of Christianity and the influence of the European powers in the Japanese archipelago. But it wasn't to be. In 1853, President Millard Fillmore sent a fleet of warships to Japan, forcing them to open the nation under threat of force. This was a turning point that led to the Meiji Restoration, which was a period of rapid industrialization, centralization of power, and an increase in military might. This led to the creation of the Japanese Empire we studied in schools as they expanded in Asia and became the future that they themselves were trying to avoid. And, as we all know, these wars, conquests, and annexations were a major drain on resources, resulting in unnecessary loss of life and were generally a net negative for everyone involved. So we know what happened, but we never really stopped to think. What of the average person that was living during this time? How did they fare? How did they deal with it? And this is Millennium Actress. This is what we have in the protagonist, Chiyoko Fujiwara. Even from the beginning, Chiyoko Fujiwara's life was shaped by chaos in Japan. As a child, she lost her father in the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923. Her film career begins as a result of her being recruited to make pro-Japanese propaganda. The man she became captivated by in her youth was an anti-war activist who left Japan for the Manchurian Front. Eventually, after this series of unfortunate events and Japan's eventual loss in World War II, her career blossoms as the country rebuilds. But this does little to change the fact that nearly every major event in her life was caused by some sort of catastrophe, and that film was one of the only things she could lose herself in, and one of the only outlets she had to actually make choices in her life to some degree. In Chiyoko, we have someone who is clearly very talented and well regarded in her profession. She's extremely successful and has made quite a name for herself. But what leads her to live such a reclusive life? Much of the film is dedicated to Chiyoko rediscovering some of her life's greatest moments, but due to her failing memory, film and reality seem to be one and the same. Despite this confusion, one thing that we see remain constant throughout the film is Chiyoko's memory of the anti-war activist she was obsessed with. He's somehow present, whether as a plot point, character, or objective for most of the story. I kept asking myself why. Why is this seemingly insignificant individual such an important memory to Chiyoko? What is his purpose in the story? Why do I keep hearing about him? Why? Let me tell you the conclusion that I came to. By the end of the film, she basically spells it out for the audience. But the painter himself doesn't truly matter in the grand scheme of things. However, in difficult times, people cling to literally anything, and we have to understand that. People cling to memories and ideas, no matter how small. The painter represents one of the few positive memories Chiyoko had of her youth in a time where the world looked like it was coming to an end. Imagine losing your father while living through one of the worst periods in modern Japanese history. It's hard to say exactly how you would react. Chiyoko creates a mythos of grandeur in her mind around the painter, who he was, and the search for him, in order to sort of deal with everything she was going through. And I can't truly judge her. She had a wonderful career and seemed to be a woman of excellent character. But this is just sad all around. I can't help but think that things shouldn't have been this way for her or anyone else. She shouldn't have had to invent an impossible mission in her mind just to deal with the endless cycle of violence and a future that she didn't choose for herself. I'm not gonna lie, this story is extremely heavy. If you are a person that is at least somewhat present of mind, you'll be thinking about a lot of different things during this. You may relate this to things that are going on today. It may bring you back to things that you've dealt with in the past, but it's tough. When we talk about war, we typically think in terms of the damage done and lives lost, which are relatively easy to understand. But other things, futures altered, love lost, careers disrupted, dreams crushed, these things are harder to see and harder to measure. Part of the reason I take such a hard anti war stance is because I firmly believe that it is quite literally impossible to measure the effects of even small scale conflicts because they can have ripple effects that leave cracks in society for generations. What if Chiyoko was supposed to marry that painter? What if she was never supposed to become an actress? What if she simply got to make her own choices? To be quite honest with you, we should be asking these questions during any war, during any conflict, anywhere in the world, whenever and wherever they happen. Because there are millions of Chiyokos out there, in the past, in the present, and in the future. There are millions of people waiting on somebody who will never come home. There are millions of people for which their life will never be the same. This is a sad story, but it's also an exercise in perspective. I like to think that I'm a fairly analytical person that considers as many situations and perspectives as I can, but this film presented me with a tragic scenario that I personally couldn't have imagined. This is a very real story despite it being fictional. I guess that's because it's roughly based on the lives of two very real actresses from one of Japan's finest creative eras, Setsuko Hara and Hideko Takamine. They could have very easily experienced and felt the same things as Chiyoko. After all, Setsuko Hara in her final press conference said that she had very little interest in acting and everything she did was for the purpose of supporting her family after the war. And this is one of the greatest actresses in Japanese history. Think about that. What if Setsuko Hara was never cast in propaganda films? She wouldn't have become who she became, but maybe she would have lived a life that meant more to her. Maybe she would have lived a life she chose. This is pretty tough, I'm not gonna lie to you. This is pretty tough. Well, imagine that. A movie that appears to be a retrospective on a once great actress ended up being one of the more tragic tales I've experienced. A woman spent the entirety of her life chasing a man who met his untimely end decades ago. In a life filled with tragedy, after growing up in one of the roughest periods in modern history, Chiyoko clings to the memories that she held dear, that made life worthwhile and never lets them go. I think this is an important message for all of us and can be interpreted in a number of ways. The things we have to do to cope with our circumstances, the effects of traumatic events, and the fact that you may spend the rest of your life dealing with them. Regardless of your takeaway, this is an absolutely wonderful film from an immensely talented director, Satoshi Kon, who I hope is remembered forever. I strongly suggest you go out and get the Steelbook or watch it on your favorite streaming service. Now, I hope I've given you another anime to watch, analyze, and some important ideas to think about. Until next time, this is Fushi's Room. If you want me to talk about something else, drop it in the comments below. I'll do my best to get to it. Have a great rest of your day. Holla at your boy, we doing anime review. Yeah, holla at your boy, we doing anime review. Yeah, holla at your boy, we doing anime review. Yeah, holla